Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the AI Healthcare Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Reed, and today we are joined with my friend, Kev Coleman, who's a healthcare thought leader and a visiting research fellow at the Paragon Health Institute. Kev, thank you again so much for your time today.
Oh, no problem. And thank you so much for inviting me, Dylan. I appreciate it.
Of course. And to start off the conversation, how did you enter the AI healthcare space?
That's a good question. I was recruited by the CEO of a Boston-based startup to head up product management, which is the business role that defines the functionality of commercial software. The company's original vision was for e-commerce, and it was staffed with many people like myself who had previously worked at a major data analytics firm leveraging complex multidimensional databases. Well, during my time at that startup, the Modernization Act was passed, which brought us, among other things, the Medicare Part D drug benefit. Now, at our startup, we decided to build a private Medicare insurance exchange that would allow senior citizens and their caretakers to compare plan options and enroll all online.
Mhm.
And this transition within the business meant that I had to learn the ins and outs of not just Medicare insurance, but insurance in general, the attendant regulatory structures, and how I could properly interact with the government when you're pioneering something new, because there just wasn't something like us at that point who was replicating at the same time a government initiative.
Mm.
The exchange we put out was a big success, and I will say it had none of the technical problems or excessive costs that were associated with the release of healthcare.gov years later. So I am proud of that. Um, then after that experience, years later, when the Open Data Initiative was promoted under the Obama administration, I analyzed that data to shine light on health insurance issues that I thought were not receiving enough attention. The insights made their way into the press and various policy discussions, and I think since then I've been unable to extricate myself from the world of healthcare research and policy considerations.
Mhm. And coming from a startup background, how has that transition been from a healthcare startup executive to being a scholar in AI healthcare for you?
Uh, yeah, that'll take me a little while to explain, but tell me if I go too long in this. I was very grateful for the opportunities given to me professionally within startups. I had the chance to work with talented coworkers and benefit from their insights. And I think even more importantly, early in my career, I was held responsible for the success of clients implementing the software I designed.
Mhm.
This was just by virtue of our need to keep them as clients and keep the revenue flowing for our survival. This experience impressed upon me the sociological dimensions of software and how processes, incentives, and other factors outside of programming could determine a software success. I'll give you a quick example. I remember having designed an expert decision support system that was meant to normalize the financial advice you'd get across a retail bank's consumer touch points, whether it be the web or the call center or the tellers, et cetera. And the system's process for eliciting consumer requirements for a banking product dynamically adapted based on every response, and it could make a new employee who was a novice function like a pro. However, I discovered that my software was a failure in the call center because call center employees were rated by how many calls they handled in an hour. Now, the process I introduced increased the time per call. And even though it was to improve the recommendations given to customers, that still caused an innate conflict
Mm.
with the clients who were implementing this. Now, this conflict between the software's function and the call center's incentivization was really an important lesson for me, and certainly was reflected in my later product designs. And bringing this back to AI, or what I'm doing now, I would hope that one of the values I bring to the table is combining a grasp of fundamental AI technologies and nuancing them by the realities of software development, quality assurance testing, client implementation considerations, regulatory constraints. And hopefully having that type of multidimensional perspective allows me to meaningfully contribute to the conversation.
Mhm. No, that's very helpful. And kind of with both of those respective backgrounds, what is the thing that you think business professionals in AI healthcare policy really need to be aware of under a Trump 2.0 administration?
Well, that's a big question. The short answer is a lot. The Trump administration has publicly stated the strategic importance of artificial intelligence technologies for the nation, and at the same time, the new administration is bringing in new voices and perspectives on the subject. Thankfully, the people with whom I know are dealing with AI in the new administration, these people do want to uncover the best ideas for AI governance. They strike me as nonpartisan and seeking to build bridges. I think that defining issues in the coming years will not be something as silly as a binary of no regulation versus over-regulation, but rather crafting AI regulation that can preserve public safety and data privacy while maintaining world leadership in AI.
Mhm.
I think the recent DeepSeek announcement from China has only made concerns about AI leadership all the more pressing. And you have also seen, the announcement from the administration about the possibility of an AI Manhattan project. So with that will come congressional debates over funding, over purpose, return on investment, and this means that we're going to be in a dynamic, evolving situation, I think, especially for the next 2 years.
Mhm. And you bring up a great point because, one of the things that I was reading, kind of comparing and contrasting between, former President Biden's executive order and then President Trump's executive order on AI when it was, I think, 2018, 2019, just kind of what agencies would enforce it.
Mhm.
It seemed like Biden's was much more all the agencies coming together. And you and I both know getting the agencies all on one page isn't a fight within itself compared to, Trump's administration in 2018, 2019, where I was like, NIST, you guys go out and do it and figure it out.
Well, one of the things that I've been advocating, uh, to people, in the know and, within the administration is a sectoral approach.
Mhm.
One of the things that scared me was the idea of an AI czar, just because, you know, AI in and of itself is a profoundly complex subject, but then its applications have such unique considerations on a sector by sector basis. What's an issue in healthcare is very different than what it is within securities, which is very different than it is in national defense, which is very different than what it is within intellectual property and entertainment, et cetera. And because of that, I've strongly advocated for a strong sectoral approach. Take those, don't create new agencies. Take your existing agencies who know the domain best, know the ecosystem, the players, um, and the existing regulations, and allow them to be able to, you know, promote the or propose the right governance model, and then seek input from the public and the appropriate stakeholders within that sector's ecosystem.
Mhm. And how do you see AI presenting unique software validation challenges to the FDA?
Well, yeah. Uh, so with traditional software, and I'm going to oversimplify this, but you have very often a set of rules and conditions. Think about the classic structure of the, if then else statement within programming. It's very foundational within traditional software. Um, and that was a model where you could then put in parameters and get very predictable outputs. With an artificial intelligence, there's a much higher dependence on data. The data itself can train the system and determine the outputs. Then also depending on the type of AI, the system may adapt further over time with greater experience and more data. And because of that, that introduces a new paradigm. In the old world, the emphasis would be very heavily biased on pre-market validation. With AI, there are going to be certain instances where you're going to have the need for post-market surveillance after approval. Now, the million-dollar question there is, how do we implement that in such a way that it doesn't inhibit AI innovation, doesn't introduce unnecessary costs, and it's actually within the means of an agency like the FDA to be able to accomplish, given its staffing and resources. So that's one of the issues that myself and colleagues are working on. Trying to come up with proposals that can help the government think about that subject in a productive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you bring up a great point, because it really made me think of what Caliph said in Vegas, not too long ago. Of we don't have, with the current staff we have, we can't manage conventional workload on top of this, kind of what's coming with AI. So it's like, they're overwhelmed, and the question becomes like, how do you and you said it perfectly, like, how do you manage to keep people safe, but also at the same time allow this technology to be more integrated into our American economy, and to
Mhm.
allow people to use it? And that's, it might sound like an easy question when you say it out loud, but it's, the more you think about it, it gets more and more challenging.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to need to have a rather thoughtful risk identification matrix, because the same technology in different contexts manifests different risks. Let's take the most controversial one, generative AI.
Hmm.
Um, you could put the same input into a generative AI system, let's say 4 times, and get the same answer 4 times. On the fifth instance of inputting that same that same parameter, you might get a different output. And I'm not giving that as a ratio, by the way, a
Hmm.
standard ratio, but I'm just using that as an example.
Hmm.
The capacity for unpredictability um, has different risk implications on whether or not you're dealing with um, something that's doing real-time diagnosis, or if it's functioning, for instance, in drug design. In drug design, you could have a generative AI system go through and generate thousands of drug designs, and then reperform the test and maybe have variations between the sets of what's generated. It doesn't really matter as much there, because the drug researchers are going to go through, take what they believe are the best candidates, and still take those candidates and put it through the traditional drug testing that the FDA requires for safety. So we're not introducing a significant new risk there, as opposed to a diagnostic setting where variability could mean the proper or improper diagnosis of disease.
Hmm. Yeah, because with clinical trials, just figuring out kind of, just recruiting candidates, tracking candidates, like that's a strenuous process even within the FDA drug approval process.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's it's funny when you touch on that. It reminds me of questions over algorithmic bias.
Mm.
And people say, well, we have to make sure we have perfect data. And the thing is, we actually don't have perfect data for medical devices in general. AI is just going to be, in some ways, one more instance of that. And the reason for this is that when you're doing a clinical study that's going to produce data that might be, used in the design of a medical device or in the development of a software program, et cetera, you can have issues that will affect whether or not your clinical sample is representative of a population as a whole.
Hmm.
In certain cases, you have certain inclusion or exclusion criteria that are necessary for being able to get some, a desired, piece of information, but that affects whether or not you have perfect, statistical cohorts that reflect the demographics of the nation as a whole. Then you have further complications around certain diseases are not representative of the nation as a whole. We have age-related factors like pediatric cancers versus geriatric cancers. We have sex-specific diseases like, cervical cancer versus testicular cancer. Then you also have certain diseases that are associated with certain ethnicities, like Tay-Sachs for within the Ashkenazi Jewish population, or sickle cell disease within populations of African descent. So all those things can complicate, I think, a good intention of this idea of we're going to have, kind of perfectly representative data sets for, AI or any other medical device. Certainly as a goal, it just is not always easily implemented. Or, in some cases, like, specific diseases, it may not actually be what's desirable.
Because what you just said, it made me think of like the NIST frameworks that have been talked around a lot here in DC. And the argument that I've also read online is, well, why can't we be like our neighbors in Canada, or like in Europe, which Europe's a continent, not a country.
Yeah.
But it's like, let's just take Canada, for example. Canada has 37 million people.
Mhm.
We have close to 400 million people in this country. So it's like, I just think whatever works in one country, it's just going to make it very logistically challenging, or arguably impossible, to actually replicate that successfully here in the United States, just because we're such a big country.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would depend on the specific issue and its specific implementation. Um, I think we have a lot of advantages within the United States in terms of the intellectual capital that we have and the expertise. At the same time, we also have the problem of lots of competing budgetary priorities, and some of the let's call it, fractious political debates
Mm.
over AI on, whether or not it's, some type of, boogeyman or a panacea. Of course, the reality is, uh, at neither pole. But I am hopeful about its application. It's just the worst thing that we could do is take a lazy and reactive approach to AI, and it's going to become one more incremental cost within healthcare
Mhm.
of at a system that's already, consuming, 17.3% of our gross domestic product. Now, if we really look to meaningfully apply AI within some of the major cost centers of our health expenditures, it could be transformative, but that's not going to happen by accident. I think we're going to need, um, both private and public support.
Mhm. And how do you want to contribute to the field of AI healthcare?
Whew. I think I could boil this down to two goals. First, I want to reduce American healthcare costs through AI so our healthcare spending is sustainable and doesn't threaten our other priorities within the federal budget. Second, I want to create the optimum conditions for AI to improve prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of disease.
Hmm.
If I can make any type of contribution to those two goals, I will be a happy man.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's and that's kind of the wonders of AI of AIs. It's the common argument here in the United States when it comes to healthcare policy is, you know, does this improve patient outcomes? Okay, but like what are the offsets? And then like vice versa. So it's like I argue that, AI is kind of that happy medium between improving patient outcomes, but also decreasing federal spending here in the United States.
Mhm. Yeah, and all of that has to be empirically validated.
Hmm.
We can't just kind of scream AI like startups do to venture capitalists.
Yeah.
Um, we actually have to go through and prove that we have clinical effectiveness to different claims, and that we can actually pass on savings to the government, to the consumer, et cetera. Um, but that doesn't, that won't happen unless we help this technology to flourish.
Hmm.
So, I don't want people to have unrealistic expectations like, every AI system is going to be great. Of course not. That's silly. That's like saying every software system is going to be great. And no one would say that. It's ridiculous. Um, Instead, AI has the potential to produce some, really transformative advancements, but, we need to validate these claims on a
Hmm.
case by case basis.
Hmm. And what do policymakers in particular need to understand about AI healthcare, so that it doesn't stifle innovation, but also, has that consumer-centric approach when keeping people safe?
Uh, that's a big question. I would, not to plug myself, but I would strongly recommend reading a paper I published late last year called Healthcare AI Regulation: Guidelines for Maintaining Public Safety and Innovation. It's published over at Paragon Health Institute. And some of the key points deal with a sectoral approach to AI regulation, which we discussed earlier. Um, Another point is that, AI is actually a collection of different programming methodologies that manifest different vulnerabilities in different contexts. And, we need to make sure that regulation reflects those same dimensions. Um, we should make sure that the regulation is, specifying, the subtype of AI rather than speaking of AI generically,
Hmm.
which I find very counterproductive. Another point goes back to this idea of risk determination and how do we deal with it pre-market, and what are the conditions when we should be concerned post-market, and what can we do about it. So anyway, those are some of the major things. But the first part of the paper goes through kind of the um, main challenges, that surround the subject of AI regulation in healthcare. And then the second part of the paper provides a very clear outline of, okay, these are a set of principles that will help policymakers avoid misregulation.
Hmm. And from what we're kind of seeing from a political as well as a regulatory standpoint, you're starting to see a lot of states kind of have their own laws, and then the federal government's kind of, having its own perspective on how, AI specifically as it relates to healthcare, like their own way of doing it. So like, how do you balance both federal and state, state laws as it pertains to AI healthcare?
So to put it another way, are you asking me, should this be a federal or a state-driven issue?
Or yeah, is it possible to have both?
Certainly possible to have both. And I think ultimately that question is one the American citizens should decide. In as much as, we're a democracy, and, I certainly have my opinions on the subject.
Mm.
Now, with that said, I believe there are around 700 legislative proposals at the state level in 2024 related to artificial intelligence. Many of them did not pass, and the bills also dealt with a wide variety of AI subjects well beyond healthcare. But there is still a risk for a patchwork of different AI rules from state to state. And this could needlessly increase AI compliance costs. Imagine if you're a new AI software company, a startup, and you're taking a look and I've got, a different set of rules in Colorado versus California versus New York versus North Carolina and Tennessee and Florida. Um, that ultimately is going to drive up costs. It's going to slow the availability of AI advances to the marketplace and potentially do a lot of damage. So I think ideally, in my opinion, I'd like to see some federal principles and guidelines that might prevent contradictory requirements at the state level.
Hmm. So are you saying kind of like flexible depending upon the state?
Yeah, I mean, I give the states have the right to make the determinations that they do. I mean, this is the role of a democracy. But with that said, you do have the possibility of creating a unnecessarily diverse set of AI requirements going from state to state to state, and that would bring with it, I think, several harms.
Mm,
So for me, it's how do we recognize obviously the rights of the states to express their own priorities while at the same time promoting kind of general good governance that avoids you know duplicative and contradictory AI requirements from state to state.
mhm. Awesome. And Kev, where can people learn more about you as well as keep track of all the great papers that you've been publishing?
Well, thank you. If they go to Paragon Health Institute, that's paragoninstitute.org. They will find my papers on AI, and as a matter of fact, we're going to be developing a new kind of consolidated AI page so we can keep all those pages together, or all those reports and testimonies together in one place.
Awesome. And do you yourself have any papers that you're working on that you can share with the public?
Well, I'm currently working on a paper with Michael Penina from Duke University, and the paper isn't announced yet, but it's uh, deeply concerned with these issues around when post-market surveillance is necessary, and how do we deal with some of these challenges around unpredictable AI outputs.
Awesome. And be sure to subscribe to the AI Healthcare Podcast YouTube channel, as well as listen to the audio version of this interview on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Kev, thank you again so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for a lot of fun questions. I appreciate it.
Awesome. No, we're glad that you took the time. And this is Dylan Reed signing off.